Have you ever witnessed something you knew you shouldn't have seen? Something so wrong, so violent, that every instinct in you screamed to run, to pretend it didn't happen, to protect yourself above all else. Claire Bennett had that moment on an ordinary Thursday. At 6:20 p.m., she was finishing her workday, closing spreadsheets on her computer, organizing her desk meticulously as always. She had been an accountant at Harrow Industries for 4 years. Stable job, decent salary, professional environment. Nothing extraordinary, but it was enough. And Claire had learned to value enough. She had learned not to look for trouble, to keep her head down, to be invisible. But that night, she forgot her purse in the office. He realized it when he was already in the parking lot. He went back. The building was silent. Most of the employees had already left. She took her purse from the drawer, was leaving, when she heard it. A sound, coming from the back, from the storage room behind the administrative offices. It was a scream. Not a scream of surprise or laughter. It was a scream of pain, of real fear. Claire stopped. She should have left. She should have pretended not to hear. But something about that sound froze her in place. And then he heard it again, louder, more desperate. She walked toward the warehouse. Every step was a choice. Every step brought her closer to something that would change everything. The warehouse door was ajar. Fluorescent light leaked into the dark hallway, and Claire looked through the crack. And she saw Daniel Harrow, her boss, the owner of the company, the richest and most powerful man in that city, was beating a man. Not pushing, not arguing, beating with fists, with kicks, with brutal, calculated violence. The man on the floor, Claire vaguely recognized him as Marcus. Someone from the logistics department was bleeding. He was trying to protect himself. He was begging her to stop, and Claire froze, because it wasn't real. It couldn't be. Daniel Harrow was respected. He was a philanthropist. He donated to charity. There was a building named after him at the local university. He couldn't be doing this, but he was. And then Claire made a mistake. Not a moral mistake, but a mistake that would cost her everything. She tried to intervene. She opened the door. Stop. The word came out before she could think, and Daniel Harrow stopped. He turned, and he looked directly at her. And in that moment, in that frozen second where his eyes met hers, Claire knew. She knew with absolute certainty, two things. She had to report what she saw, and he was going to do everything in his power to make sure she didn't. Harrow said nothing. He just looked. And there was something in that look that was more terrifying than any verbal threat. It was calculation. It was assessment. It was a powerful man perceiving a problem and already deciding how to eliminate it. And then he smiled. Not a gentle smile. He smiled like a predator who has just identified his prey. Claire, he said, as if they were having a casual conversation. You're working late. She didn't answer. She couldn't. She just stood there, door open, hands still on the doorknob. Marcus on the floor behind Harrow groaned, and Harrow didn't even look back. He kept his eyes fixed on Claire. You should go home. It's dangerous to be here alone so late. The threat was there, undisguised. Claire nodded, stepped back, closed the door, and ran. Ran through the hallways. He ran through the parking lot. He got into the car, his hands trembling so much he could barely put a key in the ignition, and drove. He drove home in utter panic, because she had seen it, and he knew she had seen it. And now she had a choice. She could stay silent. She could pretend it didn't happen. She could protect herself, or he could do what he knew was right. He could report it. He could try to save Marcus. You could choose conscience over safety. Stay with me until the end, because what? Claire decided that night, the choice she made, unleashed something she could never have foreseen. It unleashed war. War where she was the target. Where every institution that should have protected her would fail. Where the entire city would turn against her. And where only one person, a sheriff, who should have followed orders but chose to follow his conscience, would stand between her and complete destruction. Claire Bennett didn't know when she witnessed that beating that she was about to discover a devastating truth about courage. that doing the right thing sometimes costs everything. And that sometimes, when you're willing to pay that price, the world punishes you for it. That night, Claire didn't sleep. She sat in the small apartment with all the doors locked, lights on, phone in hand, thinking, weighing. And when the sun rose, when she saw the first light coming through the window, she made a decision. She picked up the phone and dialed 911. I want to report a crime. Assault. I witnessed it. And with those words, with that report, Claire Bennett signed the sentence of her own life as she knew it. Because Daniel Harrow wasn't just a rich man. He was a man with power. Real power. Power that buys silence. Power that rewrites truth. And power that destroys anyone who dares to challenge him. But what neither Harrow nor Claire knew yet was that there was someone in town who couldn't be bought. Someone who would see through lies and manipulations. Someone who would ask the question no one else asked. What if she's telling the truth? And that person was about to change everything. That person was Sheriff Jake Mercer. And when Claire's complaint report arrived on his desk the next morning, he had no idea he was about to read something that would change the course of everything. Jake was 36 years old, 15 years working in law enforcement, and he had developed a sharp instinct for when something didn't add up. In that report, it didn't add up at all. Claire Bennett was accusing Daniel Harrow of aggravated assault against an employee. She described the beating in detail: location, time, injuries observed. She provided information about the victim, Marcus Webb, logistics department. Jake read it once, then he read it again, and then he did what any investigator would do. He checked his record. Claire Bennett had no record, no traffic violations. She had worked at Harrow Industries for 4 years, without incident. There was no obvious reason for her to fabricate such a serious accusation. Then Jake checked Daniel Harrow, and he found something interesting. 3 similar complaints over 7 years, all dismissed, all claiming they were false, fabricated by disgruntled employees. And in all of them, witnesses or victims disappeared or changed their stories before cases could proceed. Jake made a mental note. But before he could investigate further, he was called to the boss's office. Captain Morrison sat behind his desk with an expression Jake knew well. It was the expression of "we're going to have an uncomfortable conversation." "Jake, about this complaint against Harrow," Morrison began. "I read it. I want to interview the complainant and the victim. See if there's any basis to it." Morrison sighed. "It's already been dealt with. Harrow came in person, brought lawyers, presented evidence that Claire Bennett is a problematic employee with a history of fabricating complaints." "What evidence?" "Emails, performance reviews. Apparently, she's been reprimanded several times recently." Jake frowned. "That wasn't in her record that I saw." Harrow provided full documentation. "And what about the alleged victim, Marcus Webb?" "He resigned yesterday. Said he was moving to another state." "There's no victim, Jake. There's no case. So we're not even going to interview Claire Bennett. We're not going to verify her story." Morrison leaned forward. "Jake, Daniel Harrow employs 300 people in this city. He funds half the businesses here. He has lawyers who will sue this department for harassment if we continue pursuing this without evidence. The case is closed. Let it go." And there it was. A direct order. Let it go. Don't investigate. Don't ask questions. Just file it away and forget about it. Jake could have followed that order. He should have. But something bothered him. Maybe it was the fact that Claire had nothing to gain from a false accusation. Maybe it was a pattern of similar accusations against Harrow. Or maybe it was just instinct telling him that something was very wrong. If any of this has ever affected you, if you've ever seen injustice happening and didn't know whether to act or stay quiet, share in the comments. These decisions define who we are. Jake left the captain's office with the report in hand, and instead of filing it, he put it in his personal folder. Because technically, he wasn't investigating, just keeping his eyes open. And then he did something. That wasn't exactly by order. but wasn't against it either. He decided to talk to Claire Bennett, unofficially, just to hear her side of the story, just to see if his instincts were right. He got her address from the files. And that afternoon, after work, he drove to her apartment. He knocked on the door, he waited, and when Claire opened it, when Jake saw her face, he knew immediately. He knew she wasn't lying, because her eyes held real fear, not performative fear, not the anxiety of a liar, being confronted, but genuine terror of someone who had seen something horrible and was now paying the price. "Claire Bennett?" he asked gently. She nodded, hand still on the doorknob, body positioned as if ready to quickly close the door if necessary. "I'm Sheriff Jake Mercer. May I speak with you for a few minutes?" Hesitation crossed her face. "About what?" "About your complaint against Daniel Harrow." And Jake saw it. He saw the exact moment hope died in her eyes. "You filed it away?" "No. I got a call today. They said there wasn't enough evidence, that I was. She couldn't finish. She just stood there, holding the door, fighting back tears. "Can I come in?" Jake asked. "Not officially. Just to talk." Claire should have said no. She should have closed the door. But there was something in his face. Something that wasn't judgment or skepticism. It was genuine curiosity. It was real listening. So she opened the door wider and stepped back. Jake entered the small apartment and immediately noticed things. Windows with curtains drawn, even though it was the middle of the afternoon. A partially packed suitcase in the corner. A telephone on the table next to a list of numbers, police stations in other cities, shelters, support lines. Claire was prepared to run away. "Do you believe me?" she asked abruptly. It wasn't a rhetorical question. It was a test. Jake looked at her. At the clearly terrified woman, clearly isolated, clearly desperate for someone. Anyone who would see truth. "Yes," he said. "I believe you." And Claire crumbled. Not physically, but something inside her that had been holding everything together let go. She covered her face with her hands and began to cry. Not delicately, but with deep sobs of someone who had been alone in terror for days, and finally had someone on her side. If this part touched you, if you felt the relief of finally being believed, leave a like. It helps me know you're feeling this with me. Jake didn't move to comfort her. He didn't invade her personal space. He just stood there. He waited. And when the crying subsided, when Claire wiped her face and looked at him with red but determined eyes, he said, "Tell me everything. From the beginning, everything you saw." And Claire told her story. She told her story about going back to get her purse, about hearing screams, about opening the door and seeing Harrow beating Marcus, about how she tried to intervene, about the look Harrow gave. Heard that cold, calculating look that clearly said she was a problem to be eliminated, and about what happened after the complaint, how she was fired the next day, how colleagues stopped responding to messages, how someone scratched her car, how she received a threatening note, how she felt she was being followed but couldn't prove it. Jake listened to everything. He took mental notes. And when she finished, when a heavy silence fell between them, he said something that would change the trajectory of both their lives. "I'm going to investigate this properly. Not officially, I can't do it officially, because the case is closed. But I'm going to find out what happened to Marcus. I'm going to look for evidence. And I'm going to make sure you're safe while I do it." "Why?" Claire asked. "Why would you believe me when nobody else does?" "Because I've seen this before," Jake said. "Powerful people silencing vulnerable people. And because instinct tells me you're telling the truth. And because..." He paused. "Because if I do nothing and something happens to you, I won't be able to live with it. If you want to follow more stories like this, stories about people confronting power and finding unexpected allies, subscribe to the channel. I bring these stories every week because they need to be told." Claire looked at Jake, and for the first time since witnessing that beating, she felt something beyond fear. She felt hope. Small, fragile, but real. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you tell me everything you know about Marcus. Where he lived, who his friends were. Anything that might help me find him. And what if Harrow finds out you're investigating?" Jake met her eyes. "Then he'll find out that not everyone in this town can be bought." But what neither Jake nor Claire knew yet was that Daniel Harrow already knew. He already had people monitoring Claire. And he had already seen the sheriff visiting her apartment. And he was, at that very moment, making phone calls. Phone calls to people in high positions. People who owed favors. People who could make the troublesome sheriff disappear as easily as they made the inconvenient victim disappear. The war was only beginning, and it was going to get much worse before it got better. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because understanding who Claire really was before that night in the warehouse is to understand why what she did was so extraordinary, and why what they did to her afterward was so devastating. Claire Bennett was 29 years old, but she carried the weight of decades. Not in her face, she still had that youthful look that age gives, but in her eyes. In her eyes was the caution of someone who had learned the hard way that the world is not safe, that people hurt, and that sometimes the only way to survive is to become invisible. She had worked as an accountant at Harrow Industries for 4 years. Her office was on the 3rd floor. Her desk was near the window, but the curtains were always half closed because she didn't like feeling exposed. The work was meticulous. Numbers didn't lie. Numbers didn't change depending on mood or whim. Numbers were reliable, predictable, and Claire was good with numbers. So good that she had received 3 raises in 4 years. So good that colleagues frequently asked for her help, but never friendship. Claire didn't make friends. She kept conversations professional, polite but distant, present but not involved. And there was a reason for that. Claire had come to that city 3 years ago. She had arrived with only 1 suitcase, a few $1,000s in savings she had hidden for months, and a fierce determination to disappear, because she was running away from a man named David. David, who had been the perfect boyfriend for the first 6 months. Attentive, romantic, jealous in a way that at first seemed protective. But jealousy had turned into control, and control had turned into violence. First, verbal, then physical. Claire's journey with David had lasted 2 years. 2 years in which she tried to believe he would change. That it was her fault if she were a better girlfriend, more understanding, more careful not to provoke him, he would stop. But he never stopped. He only got worse. And when Claire finally mustered the courage to end it, when she said she was leaving, David had said something that froze her. "If you leave, I'll find you, no matter where you go. And when I find you, you'll regret it." So Claire didn't just leave. She disappeared. She moved to another state. She legally changed her name. Her birth name was Clara Benson, but Clara Bennett was who she became. She cut off all contact with anyone she knew before. She had no close family. Her parents had died when she was young. She had grown up with an aunt who had passed away 2 years before she met David. She had no close friends because David had systematically isolated her from everyone. So disappearing was easier than it should have been. Nobody looked for her. Nobody missed her. She simply vanished. And in that new city, Claire carefully built her life. A modest apartment in a quiet complex. A stable job that paid the bills but didn't attract attention. A routine that never varied: work, supermarket, home. On weekends she read, walked in the park. Always alone. Always vigilant. Always checking over her shoulder. Because fear hadn't gone away. Fear that David would find her. Fear that one day, she would turn a corner and he would be there. So she lived small. Lived quietly. Lived invisibly. The transformation those 3 years created in Claire was profound. She, who had been an open person in her youth, with friends, plans, and dreams, had become a shadow. She had learned not to make waves, not to draw attention, to accept small injustices without complaining, because complaining meant being noticed, and being noticed meant risk. So when a colleague at work received credit for her project, Claire said nothing. When her boss made an inappropriate comment, Claire looked away and changed the subject. When she saw something wrong, Claire looked the other way. Because survival demanded it. Survival demanded suppressing every instinct for justice, every impulse to defend oneself, every spark of courage. And for 3 years, Claire survived. She didn't live. She merely survived. She existed in the spaces between being seen and being forgotten, and she had convinced herself that she was fine that way, that safety was worth solitude, that invisibility was worth silence, that being alive, even if not truly living, was enough. Until that night, until she heard those screams, until she opened that door and saw Daniel Harrow beating Marcus Webb, and something inside Claire that had been dormant for 3 years awoke. Because she knew that violence, she knew it intimately. She knew the sound of fist against flesh. She knew the sight of someone defenseless being hurt. She knew the feeling of utter powerlessness. She had been in Marcus's position. She had been that person on the ground, begging for it to stop, knowing that no one would come to help. And in that moment, Claire had a choice. She could close the door. She could pretend she didn't see. He could protect the small, safe life he had so carefully built. Or he could do what no one had done for her when she needed it. He could intervene. He could be a voice. She could choose courage over safety. And for the first time in 3 years, for the first time since she ran from David, Claire chose not to be invisible. She chose to speak. And that choice, that decision to finally do the right thing even when it was dangerous, that choice would destroy everything. Because Claire didn't realize at the time, couldn't have realized, that Daniel Harrow wasn't like David. David was a violent man with uncontrolled rage. Harrow was something far more dangerous. He was a violent man with real power, with the resources to silence, with the connections to rewrite the truth. David had threatened to find Claire if she ran away. Harrow didn't need to make threats. He simply acted, systematically, efficiently, destroying anyone who dared to challenge him. And Claire, with her past of trauma and survival, with her life built on careful anonymity, with her determination to never again be in a vulnerable position, was about to discover that doing the right thing sometimes puts you in exactly the most vulnerable position possible. She was about to discover that the system that should protect courageous witnesses often fails. And she was about to discover that sometimes, when you finally find the courage to speak, the world punishes you for having a voice. In the days following that complaint, Claire watched the life she had built crumble with terrifying speed. She was fired, not formally for making the complaint that would be illegal, but for inadequate performance based on recent evaluations Claire had never seen, that didn't exist until the day after the complaint, but that suddenly were in her file, retroactively dated, signed by supervisors Claire barely knew. She tried to contest it. She tried to explain, but HR had documentation. They had proper process. He had reasons that seemed legitimate on paper. And Claire, without the resources for a lawyer, without proof of retaliation, had no power to fight. So she picked up a box of belongings from her desk, walked through the office where she had worked for 4 years, and felt the stares of colleagues. Not sympathetic stares, judgmental stares, because rumors had already spread. Rumors that Claire had fabricated the complaint because she was being fired for poor performance, that she was trying to extort Harrow, that she was problematic, unstable, a liar. And Claire, carrying boxes through that silent office, felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt exposed, vulnerable, a target. Exactly the things she had run from David to avoid. She had spent 3 years building a life where no one saw her. And now everyone was watching, judging, deciding who she was based on lies that a powerful man had planted. And there was nothing she could do to change the narrative. Because in a fight between a powerless person and a person with all the power, The outcome was already decided before it even began. Comment below if you think Claire did the right thing by reporting it even, knowing she could lose everything, or if she should have protected the life she had built and remained silent. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what happened to Claire in the 48 hours following the accusation wasn't just injustice. It was a systematic machine of destruction. It was a brutal demonstration of how real power works, not with obvious violence or explicit threats, but with surgical precision, with a rewriting of reality, with a transformation from victim to villain so rapid and complete that even Claire began to question her own sanity. The complaint was filed on a Thursday night. Claire went to the police station, still trembling, still processing what she had seen. The officer at reception took her statement. He seemed to take her seriously. He said an investigator would be assigned, that they would get in touch. Claire left that police station with a strange feeling of relief. Not complete relief, but a feeling that she had been part of it. She had reported it. She had put the truth on the official record. Now the system would do its job. Now Marcus would be protected. Now Harrow would face consequences. But on Friday morning, when Claire arrived at work, because she still didn't know she should be afraid, still believed that reporting a crime protected her instead of exposing her, she was immediately called to HR. Two people were waiting. The HR director, a stern woman named Patricia, and a lawyer Claire had never seen before, a man in an expensive suit with a leather briefcase. "Sit down, Ms. Bennett," Patricia said. His tone wasn't kind. It was formal, cold. Claire sat down, confusion growing. "There are serious accusations," the lawyer began without preamble. "Accusations that you fabricated a criminal complaint against Mr. Harrow as retaliation for negative performance reviews." Claire blinked. Processing what? "No. I reported it because I witnessed assault that no one else witnessed," the lawyer continued, in which the alleged victim, Mr. Marcus Webb, completely denies. "Marcus denies it, but I saw it. I saw Harrow beating him. He was bleeding. He was." "Mr. Webb resigned last night," Patricia interrupted. "He said he's moving to care for a sick relative. And before leaving, he provided a written statement that no assault occurred, that his relationship with Mr. Harrow was always professional and respectful." The transformation in reality happened so quickly that Claire could barely keep up. This doesn't make sense. Why would Marcus lie? Why would he? And there's the matter of his performance, the lawyer continued as if Claire hadn't spoken. He opened a folder. He pulled out documents, multiple negative evaluations in the last 6 months, written warnings for errors in financial reports, complaints from colleagues about hostile behavior. He pushed papers across the table, and Claire looked. She saw her name. She saw a signature that should have been hers but wasn't. She saw dates. She saw specific details of errors she never made, of behaviors she never had. "That's false," she said, her voice rising. "I never received any of those evaluations. I never made those mistakes. This was fabricated." "Are you saying that official company documentation is false?" the lawyer asked, raising an eyebrow. "Are you accusing Harrow Industries of falsifying records?" And Claire realized the trap. If she insisted that documents were false, she would be making another serious accusation. Another accusation she couldn't prove, against a company with endless resources and lawyers who clearly knew exactly what they were doing. "You are being effectively dismissed immediately," Patricia said, "for professional misconduct and inadequate performance. You have the right to appeal, but we advise against it. Mr. Harrow is being generous by not prosecuting for defamation." Claire left that office in shock. She picked up a box. She cleaned her desk under the gaze of her colleagues. And he realized something devastating. No one was surprised. No one was outraged for her. Because the narrative had already been planted. It had already been said that Claire was problematic. That she was being fired for legitimate reasons. That the complaint was a desperate attempt at revenge. And people, most people, believe the most convenient version. The version that doesn't require them to do anything. The version where they can continue normal lives without questioning whether they are working for a monster. The impact of losing her job was immediate and terrifying. Claire was living on the financial edge. She had savings for maybe 2 months. After that, she didn't know. But worse than the financial loss was the isolation. She tried calling some colleagues, people she had worked with for 4 years. No one answered, or they answered and were politely distant. "Claire, I'm sorry, but I can't get involved in this. I still work there. You understand?" She understood. She understood perfectly. She understood that no one would risk their position for her. That she was alone, completely. And then the threats began. The first was subtle. Claire went to the supermarket on Saturday morning. When she returned, there was a note under the car windshield wiper. Plain paper. Message written in block letters. "You should have kept quiet." There was no signature, no specific threat. Just that sentence. But the message was clear. Someone was watching. Someone wanted her to know she had made a mistake. Claire took the note to the police. The officer took the report with an expression that clearly said he thought she was being dramatic. Probably a joke. Teenagers. We'll register it. But without more information, there's not much we can do. 2 days later, Claire went out in the morning and found her car vandalized. The word liar scratched into the side paint. Deep, deliberate. Someone had used a key or something similar and had taken their time. It had been done in the middle of the night, in the parking lot of her apartment complex, and nobody saw anything. Nobody heard anything. Or if they did, they didn't care enough to report it. Claire called the police again. Another report. Another board officer. Vandalism is unfortunately common. Do you have insurance? She didn't. She couldn't afford comprehensive insurance on her salary. And now she didn't even have a salary. The revelation that she was completely vulnerable, completely exposed, hit Claire in waves. She began to sleep poorly. She woke at every sound. She checked locks multiple times. She kept lights on. She started seeing cars that seemed to follow her. Or was she imagining it? She began to feel stares when she went to the supermarket. Or was she paranoid? The line between rational fear and paranoia began to blur. And this constant second-guessing was part of the tactic. It was to make her question her own judgment, to make her seem unstable, so that if she made another complaint, another accusation, no one would take her seriously. And it worked. Because when Claire tried to speak with the detective assigned to the original case, when she called multiple times asking for an update, she finally got a response 3 days later. "Ms. Bennett, the case has been closed. There is insufficient evidence to proceed. Mr. Webb denies that the assault occurred, and Mr. Haro provided extensive documentation that his complaint was motivated by professional retaliation. I advise you to move on." "But I saw it," Claire insisted. "I saw him beating Marcus. I didn't make it up. With no victim willing to testify, no physical evidence, it's your word against his. And frankly, Ms. Bennett, his credibility is significantly stronger than yours in this community." Credibility. That word carried everything. Harrow had credibility because he had money, because he employed people, because he was respected, and Claire was nobody. She was a person without connections, without resources, without power. So even if she were telling the absolute truth, even if she had witnessed a horrific crime, even if she had the courage to denounce it, it didn't matter. Because battles were never about truth. They were about power. And she had none. The city began to turn against her in subtle but devastating ways. The owner of the apartment complex where she lived posted a notice that he was receiving complaints about a problematic tenant. At the supermarket where she always shopped, the cashiers started being cold and distant. Someone spread the rumor that she had been fired for theft, a variation of a rumor that made her not only a liar but a criminal. And Claire saw it happen in real time. She saw how a reputation could be destroyed without any truth, How a community could decide who you are based on whispers and innuendo. How you could do everything right, witness a crime, report it, follow the proper process and still be punished, still be destroyed, still end up being the villain. And the worst part, Claire began to question her decision. She started to think, if she had stayed silent, if she had closed the door and left, she would still have a job. She would still have peace. She would still have the small but secure life she had so carefully built. Speaking didn't save, Marquise disappeared. Speaking didn't punish, Haruhi remained free, powerful, untouched. All she did was destroy her. And on dark nights, alone in an apartment where she no longer felt safe, Claire wondered, was it worth having a conscience when a conscience costs you everything? Now I want to delve even deeper into this matter. Because the moment Jake Mercer decided to read that archived report for the third time was the moment everything changed. Not officially. Not in a way that anyone outside of him would notice. But something inside him. Some instinct, sharpened by 15 years of seeing lies and truths, told him there was more to that story. Much more. Jake was alone in the office, late at night, when he pulled out the file again. He'd already read it twice. He should let it go. Captain had been clear. Case closed. No evidence. Move on. But Jake couldn't. It didn't start with Claire's complaint. It started with Daniel Harrow's history. And that's where he found the pattern. First complaint, 7 years ago. Employee alleging that Harrow had verbally and physically assaulted him during a discussion about payroll. Witness, a colleague who was present. Resolution. Employee withdrew the complaint, accepted financial compensation, signed a confidentiality agreement. Witness changed the story, said it was a misunderstanding. Case closed. Second complaint, 5 years ago. Supplier alleging that Harrow had threatened him with violence during a contractual dispute. Witness an assistant who was at the meeting. Resolution. Supplier did not appear to give a formal statement, moved to another state without leaving contact information. Witness resigned from their job, refused to speak. Case closed. Third complaint. 3 years ago. Business partner alleging physical assault after a disagreement over company finances. No witnesses this time. Resolution. Partner withdrew the complaint after amicably resolving differences. Sold a stake in the company for an undisclosed amount. Case closed. And now Claire. Same trajectory. Witness disappears. Complainant discredited. Case closed. 4 times. 4 separate complaints over 7 years. All closed. And nobody ever connected the dots. Nobody saw a pattern. Jake knew why no one connected. Because Harrow was intelligent. He spaced out incidents. He ensured victims were effectively silenced. And most importantly, because Daniel Harrow had something most criminals didn't. Systemic power. He wasn't just a rich man. He was a man who employed a significant portion of the city, who donated to political campaigns, who sat on boards, who knew judges, prosecutors, police chiefs. He didn't just need to threaten victims. He had an entire system that unintentionally, or sometimes intentionally, protected him. Because it was easier. Because it was more convenient. Because challenging Harrow meant consequences. Jake's understanding of the case was completely transformed at that moment. Because he realized Claire wasn't an opportunistic liar. She was the latest in a line of people who had dared to challenge a powerful man. And like everyone before her, she was being systematically destroyed. And nobody was doing anything to stop it. Worse, the system was actively aiding this destruction by shelving the case, accepting Harrow's narrative without question, and treating Claire as a problem instead of a witness. Jake closed the file, and made a decision he knew could cost him dearly. He decided to ignore the captain's order. He decided to investigate. Not officially, he couldn't do it officially, but as a concerned citizen. As a person with a badge who still believed that a badge meant protecting, not ignoring. He took Claire's address from the records. And that night, after his shift, he drove to her apartment. You knocked on the door. You waited. and you heard hesitant movement on the other side. Who is it? Claire's voice, cautious. Sheriff Jake Mercer. I'd like to ask you a few questions, if you have a few minutes. Long silence. And then the door opened. Just a crack. Chain still in place. And when Jake saw Claire for the first time, when he really looked at her, all his training, all his experience, screamed, "This woman isn't lying." She was terrified. Eyes red and swollen from crying, or lack of sleep, or both. Pale face, defensive posture, body positioned as if ready to quickly close the door. But more than that, there was something in her eyes. There was no challenge from a liar being confronted. There was no calculation from a manipulator trying to deceive. There was only deep fear and desperate exhaustion. "Miss Bennett, I read your report, and I wanted to talk about what you saw." "The case was closed," Claire said, her voice flat. "They said there was no evidence, that my credibility was in question." "I know what they said," Jake replied, "but I don't agree. Can I come in? Just to talk, not officially, I promise." Claire hesitated. All her instincts, all her 3 years of training, living in fear, told her not to trust him, to close the door, not to expose herself any further. But there was something in his face, something that seemed genuine. So she released the chain, opened the door, and let Sheriff in. Jake entered the small apartment and immediately noticed signs. Curtains all drawn even though there was still daylight. A partially packed suitcase in the corner. She was considering fleeing. A phone on the table with a list of numbers: shelters, police stations, helplines. This woman was living in constant fear. The impact of seeing the conditions Claire was living in hit Jake harder than he expected, because it wasn't just about a closed case. It was about a woman who had had the courage to do the right thing and was now paying a devastating price. "Please sit down," he said gently. Claire sat. Jake sat in the chair opposite her. And for a moment, they just looked at each other. Claire trying to decide if she could trust him. Jake trying to decide how to begin. "I believe you," Jake finally said. Straightforward. No beating around the bush. And he saw the impact of those words on Claire's face. He saw how her eyes immediately filled with tears, how her lower lip began to tremble, how she tried to hold back, tried to maintain composure, but couldn't. She broke down, not dramatically, but silently, covering her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs she tried to suppress. And Jake, who had seen many people cry throughout his career, who had learned to maintain professional distance, felt a pang in his chest. Because that crying wasn't manipulation. It was the profound relief of someone who had been alone in terror, and finally had someone believing her. "I'm sorry," Claire said eventually, wiping her face with the back of her hand. I didn't expect to hear that." "You shouldn't have had to wait," Jake said. "It should have been the standard response when you filed the complaint." Jake's journey up to that point had been built on choices. The choice to read archived files. The choice to see patterns no one else saw. The choice to ignore orders and investigate anyway. And now, the choice to sit in that apartment and truly listen. Not just take formal testimony, but listen as a human being. "Tell me everything," he said. "From the beginning. Everything you saw, everything that happened afterward. I need to know everything." And Claire told him. She recounted details she hadn't been able to tell before, because the original detective hadn't really wanted to hear them. He told her about going back to get her bag, about hearing screams, about opening the door and seeing Harrow beating Marcus with violence that was clearly intentional, controlled, and terrifying. She recounted the moment Harrow saw her, the look he gave her. It wasn't a surprise, Claire said. It wasn't panic about being caught. It was calculation. It was him deciding in real time how to deal with me. She spoke of veiled threats, of going to the police anyway, of believing that filing a report would protect her, and then about how it all fell apart. Dismissal, isolation, threats, vandalism, and Marcus. Jake asked, "Do you know where he went?" No. He simply disappeared. The day after I filed my report, he didn't show up for work. Nobody knows where he is. Or if they do, they're not saying. Jake took mental notes, and he realized Claire was right about everything. Every detail of her story matched patterns he'd seen in previous accusations. Harrow had a playbook, and he executed it perfectly. Silence, victim, discredit witness, file case, repeat. I'm going to find Marcus, Jake said. And I'm going to find out what really happened. But Ms. Bennett, Claire, you need to understand something. If I start digging into this, if I start investigating Harrow seriously, he'll find out. And he might come after me too. But more importantly, he might escalate against you. He's already coming after me, Claire said, her voice small but firm. So honestly, I don't know how much worse it can get. Jake looked at her, at the woman who had lost her job, reputation, and safety, who was living in constant fear, who had been abandoned by everyone, and he felt her resolve harden. It will get better, he said. It wasn't a promise he should make. It wasn't something he could guarantee. But he said it anyway. I will find out the truth. And I will make sure you are safe. That's my promise. And Claire, looking at him, at the sheriff who had appeared when everyone else had left, who had believed when everyone else doubted, felt for the first time in weeks something beyond fear. She felt hope. Fragile, tentative, but real. Comment below. When someone finally believes in you after everyone else has turned their back on you, how does that change everything? Now I want to delve even deeper into this matter. Because the promise Jake made that night to uncover the truth, to keep Claire safe, was tested much sooner than he expected. He left her apartment around 10 o'clock at night. He had obtained important information. He had a detailed description of the beating. He had Marcus Webb's full name and last known address. He had a clear timeline. And most importantly, he had a witness who was willing to stick to their story even under pressure. Because Claire hadn't backed down. She hadn't changed any details. And Jake, who had interrogated hundreds of people, knew how to distinguish consistent truth from elaborate lies. He drove home, feeling the weight of the decision he had made. Because investigating Harrow unofficially, against the captain's direct orders, crossed lines. But Jake had learned over the years that sometimes lines needed to be crossed. That a badge wasn't a shield to hide behind. It was a responsibility. And responsibility sometimes meant doing unpopular things, difficult things, things that could cost dearly. He got home, took a shower, and was about to go to sleep when the phone rang. Unknown number. Jake hesitated, but answered. It was the 911 operator, Sheriff Mercer. We have a call about a possible burglary address. She gave the address. It was Claire's apartment. Jake's transformation was instantaneous. Adrenaline, absolute focus. He wasn't on duty. His shift had ended hours ago, but he didn't think twice. He grabbed his gun, badge, keys, and ran to his car. He called Claire while driving. She answered on the third ring. A whispering voice, terrified. Jake, did you call 911? Yes, someone's trying to get in. I'm locked in the bathroom. I hear them messing with the lock. Officers on the way. I'm on my way. Do you have a weapon? Anything to defend yourself with? Kitchen knife. I brought it with me. Good. Stay on the line with me. Jake drove faster than he should have. Emergency lights on. Siren cutting through the silent night. And during those 8 minutes between his house and Claire's apartment, he heard everything. He heard her rapid breathing. He heard her whisper. They stopped messing with the lock. He heard her say, I think they're leaving. And he heard her start crying with relief. Jake reached the apartment complex and saw it. A dark car speeding out of the parking lot. No visible license plates, sore plates covered. Jake considered giving chase. But Claire was alone, terrified. She was coming first. He parked. He ran to her apartment. He knocked on the door. Claire, it's me. Jake, you're safe now. He heard hesitant footsteps, the bathroom door opening, and then the front door being unlocked. Claire opened it, still holding the knife, her hands trembling. Pale face, enormous eyes. And when she saw Jake, when she saw the uniform and badge and solid, real presence, she crumbled. Literally, her legs gave way. Jake caught her before she fell. He held her, and felt her whole body tremble. Not from cold, from shock. From the fear she had been holding back, and could now let go because someone was there. Someone who would protect her. "You're safe," Jake said, his voice low but firm. "I'm here. You're safe." He helped her to the sofa. He sat beside her, and he waited. He waited until the trembling subsided, until her breathing calmed. And then he said, "Tell me what happened." Claire wiped her face. She tried to gather her thoughts. "I was getting ready for bed. I heard a sound at the door, like someone fiddling with the lock. I thought I was imagining things at first, but it continued. And then I heard a voice, low, like someone talking to someone else, more than one person. Did you see them?" "No." "I ran to the bathroom. I locked the door. I called 911. Jake nodded. Then he went to the door. He examined the lock. There were marks, recent scratches. Someone had tried to break in. They hadn't succeeded. The lock was good, and Claire had an additional chain installed, but they tried. And that meant something crucial. Claire wasn't paranoid. The threat was real. Someone had escalated from vandalism to attempted break-in, and Jake didn't want to think about what they would have done if they had gotten in. The impact of this revelation was immediate. Jake pulled out his phone. He called the officer on duty. "I need a unit to process the scene. Attempted burglary." Then he left the apartment. He examined the surrounding area, and it was there, hidden in a bush across the parking lot, with a direct view of Claire's window, that he found it. A camera. Small, professional, the kind used in surveillance, pointed directly at her apartment. Jake put on gloves. He carefully picked up the camera, and he felt pure rage, because this wasn't just a random threat. It was organized surveillance. It was someone monitoring Claire's every move, knowing when she was home, when she was alone, when she was vulnerable. He returned to the apartment. He showed Claire the camera, and saw the color drain from her face. "They were watching me," she whispered. "The whole time. They knew." "How long has this camera been here?" Claire asked. Jake examined the device. It had a date stamp. "According to this, it was installed 6 days ago. 2 days after your complaint." The timeline made everything fall into place. Harrow hadn't just reacted to the complaint by destroying Claire's reputation. He had placed surveillance. He had been monitoring, planning, and tonight, someone had tried to break in. Why? To intimidate, to hurt, to silence permanently. Jake made a decision in that moment. A decision that crossed more lines, that put him personally in danger. But it was the only right thing to do. "Pack some things," he told Claire. "Clothes for a few days, important documents, anything you can't leave behind." "Why? Where am I going?" "I don't know yet. But you're not staying here tonight. It's not safe. If they tried once, they'll try again. And next time, they might succeed." Claire looked around the apartment, her refuge, her safe space, which was now compromised. "Can you take me to a hotel? Not in this city? If Harrow has people watching you, a local hotel won't be safe. I'll take you to the next town. Register under a false name. Pay in cash. Are you going to pay?" "Out of my own pocket, yes." "Why? Why are you doing this?" It was the same question she had asked before, but this time it carried a different weight. Because Jake wasn't just believing her. He was actively protecting her. He was putting his own resources, his own time, his own safety at risk. "Because it's my job," Jake said, but they both knew it went beyond work. This was personal. This was a choice to stand by someone vulnerable against someone powerful. This was deciding that protecting Claire mattered more than following orders or protecting a career. Claire packed quickly. Clothes, toothbrush, laptop, important documents, all in a single backpack. And then they left. Jake checked the hallway first, checked the parking lot, and then he led Claire to his car. Not an official vehicle, his personal car. Less obvious, they drove in silence for the first 20 minutes. Jake constantly checking mirrors, making sure they weren't being followed. And then Claire asked, "Are you going to get in trouble for this? For helping me?" "Probably," Jake admitted. "But trouble is worth it if it means keeping you alive." Their journey that night was the beginning of something. Not romance, not yet. Not amidst danger and fear, but a bond. A connection forged in extreme circumstance. Claire learning she could trust. Jake learning that protecting sometimes means breaking rules. They arrived at a small hotel, 40 minutes outside the city. Jake registered the room in his name. He paid for 3 nights in advance in cash, and he led Claire to the room. "Lock everything up," he instructed. "Don't open it for anyone except me. I'll give you my personal number. Anything you call immediately." Claire nodded. And as Jake was about to leave, when he reached the door, she said, "Jake." He turned. "Thank you. For believing when no one else did. For protecting when no one else did." And Jake, looking at her, at the woman who had had the courage to report him and was now paying a devastating price, said something he hadn't planned to say. Something that came from a place deeper than professional duty. "I don't know exactly what you saw that night in the warehouse, but I know someone is terrified of what you might tell them. Afraid enough to destroy your life. Afraid enough to watch you. Afraid enough to try to break into your apartment. And that tells me you saw the truth. A truth that Harrow can't allow to come to light. And I'm going to find out exactly what that truth is. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows. That's my promise to you." And Claire, for the first time since witnessing that beating, felt that perhaps, just perhaps, she wasn't fighting an impossible battle alone. That perhaps she had an ally. Not just an ally, a protector. Someone willing to risk everything to expose the truth and keep her safe. And that realization changed something fundamental. Because Claire had spent 3 years learning not to trust anyone. And now she was being forced to relearn. To let someone in. To accept help. And it was terrifying. But it was also, for the first time in a long time, hopeful. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the days following that night weren't about Claire hiding and waiting. They were about Jake doing exactly what he promised. Finding out the truth. But the truth he found was far worse than anyone had imagined. Jake started with Marcus Webb. He used discrete contacts, databases he technically shouldn't have accessed without an active case, but he did anyway. He found his last known address. He found his phone number. Both disconnected. Marcus had literally disappeared. But Jake didn't give up. He checked hospital records, and there he found something crucial. On the night of the beating, the same night, the same time, Claire had described Marcus Webb was admitted to a hospital 40 minutes away. Not the local hospital, but a smaller, more distant one, where he probably thought he wouldn't be tracked. Treatment, broken ribs, 3 of them, moderate head trauma, extensive contusions, consistent with a beating. Exactly as Claire had described, the attending physician had noted. Patient reluctant to explain injuries, said he fell downstairs. Injuries not consistent with a fall. The doctor had suspicions, but Marcus had refused police involvement. He had been treated and released the following morning, and then he disappeared. Jake obtained a copy of the medical records through a contact who owed him a favor, and that changed everything. Because now it wasn't just Claire's word against Harrow's. There was physical evidence. There was a dated and detailed medical record proving that Marcus Webb had been beaten exactly when and how Claire testified. That was proof. Real proof. Jake felt an adrenaline rush. He felt he finally had something concrete, and he decided to take it up. He decided to confront not just the captain, but go straight to the district attorney. But before doing that, he dug deeper, because he wanted to understand why. Why would Harrow beat Marcus? Was there a personal history? A dispute? Jake began investigating the connection between them. and he discovered something that made everything fit together. Marcus Webb wasn't just a random employee. He was a logistics supervisor at Harrow Industries. He had access to shipping documents, financial records, contracts, and 3 weeks before the beating, Marcus had been contacted by federal agents investigating Harrow for tax fraud, an investigation that had apparently been going on for months, an investigation that no one locally knew about because federal agents kept it discreet. Jake's understanding of the case had completely changed. This wasn't aggression driven by anger or personal rivalry. It was a calculated attempt to silence a federal witness. Harrow had discovered that Marcus was cooperating with the investigation, and he had decided to resolve the problem in the most brutal way: physical intimidation. But Claire had seen it. Claire had witnessed not just random aggression, but an attempt to obstruct justice. And now she was a witness not just to a violent crime, but to a federal crime. Which meant the danger she faced was far, far greater than anyone had realized. Jake took everything. He had discovered medical records, connections to federal investigations, patterns of previous complaints, scheduled a meeting with Captain Morrison. He entered the office with the complete file, and he put everything on the table. "Captain, you need to see this." Claire Bennett was telling the truth. And it's not just assault. It's obstruction of federal justice. Morrison looked at documents. He flipped through records. And the expression on his face changed from irritation to concern. "Jake, where did you get this from?" "I did an investigation. Discreetly. As it should have been done from the beginning. I told you to leave this case. Alone. And I couldn't. Because an innocent woman was being destroyed." Morrison sighed. Heavy. "Jake, do you understand the position this puts me in? The position this puts the department in? I understand we have evidence of a serious crime. Evidence that should be passed on to the feds. The feds already have an investigation into Harrow. If Marcus was cooperating with them, they already know about the assault. Then why didn't they do anything? Why is Claire exposed, and they didn't protect her?" Morrison had no answer. Because the answer was complicated and dirty. The feds probably didn't want to expose a larger investigation because of the assault. They probably calculated that it was better to keep Marcus hidden and continue the tax investigation. And Claire? Claire was collateral damage. An inconvenient witness that nobody asked for. The impact of federal inaction became clear. Morrison made calls. He contacted the federal prosecutor, and the response he received was exactly what Jake feared. "We are aware of the situation. We cannot comment on an active investigation. I suggest the local department not interfere. Not interfere." Which meant, leave Harrow alone because we're building a bigger case. It doesn't matter which witness is in danger. It doesn't matter which innocent woman is being terrorized. The big case matters more. And Jake, hearing this, felt a rage he rarely felt. "So what do we do?" Morrison looked at him. "We do what we're told. We let the feds handle it." "And Claire? It's not our responsibility." "Jake." "Yes, she is," Jake said, his voice low but firm. "She's a citizen of this city. She witnessed a crime. She filed a complaint, and we abandoned her. Not just us, all of us. And now she's living in a hotel 40 minutes from here, because it's not safe to live in her own home. This is our responsibility." Morrison leaned forward. "Jake, you're too involved in this. And I need to warn you. Harrow has lawyers. Very good lawyers. And if you keep pushing, if you keep investigating against direct orders, he'll sue you personally. He'll sue the department. And I won't be able to protect you." It was a clear threat. Back down or face the consequences. And Jake had to decide right there. Obedience or conscience. He chose conscience. "Then don't protect me. I'm going to do what's right anyway." And he left the office, knowing he had just put a target on his own back. But also knowing he couldn't do otherwise. Because Claire trusted him. And he wasn't going to betray that trust. Even if it cost him his badge. Even if it cost him his career. Jake went straight from the department to the hotel where Claire was staying. He knocked on the door, using a code they had agreed upon. She opened it, and immediately saw it in his face. What happened? I found out why Harrow beat Marcus, and it's worse than we thought. He told her everything. About the federal investigation. About Marcus being a witness. About the hospital records. About how Harrow not only committed assault, but tried to silence a federal witness. You didn't just witness a crime, Claire. You witnessed obstruction of justice. And that puts you in much greater danger. Claire sat heavily on the bed. So what do we do? The feds should be protecting you, but they're not. They're prioritizing a bigger tax. Okay, so Jake paused. Then I'll go. You. But you're captain. He told me to keep quiet. I know, but I can't. And the revelation that Jake was choosing her over career, over orders, over everything, hit Claire deeply. But before anyone could say more, Jake's phone rang. It was the deputy from the department. Jake, you need to come, now. Why? Claire Bennett's car exploded. In the parking lot of the store where she was temporarily working. Jake felt his blood run cold. He looked at Claire. Is she okay? She wasn't in the car. But Jake, that was a bomb. A deliberate explosive. Not an accident. Someone is trying to kill her. The escalation was complete. From vandalism to attempted break-in to bomb. Harrow wasn't just intimidating. He was trying to eliminate. And the message was clear. Shut up or next time you'll be in the car. Comment below. When does an attempt at intimidation become an attempt at murder? At what point does the system finally act? Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the moment Jake hung up the phone, the moment he looked at Claire and saw absolute terror on her face when she realized someone had planted a bomb in her car, was the moment everything changed irrevocably. There was no going back. There was no option to retreat, to let the system handle it, to follow protocol. Because a bomb wasn't a warning. A bomb was an assassination attempt. And Jake knew, with absolute certainty, that if he didn't do something drastic, Claire wouldn't survive. Pack everything, he said, his voice firm but urgent. Now, we're not staying here. Claire looked at him with wide eyes. Where are we going? I don't know yet, but this hotel is compromised. If they put a bomb in the car, they know where you're working, which means they probably know where you're sleeping too. We need to go now. Claire didn't argue. She just started throwing things into her backpack. Her hands were trembling. And Jake picked up his own phone. He called not the department, but a friend, someone who owed him a favor, someone who had a remote cabin 2 hours away. Mark, it's Jake. I need a place to hide someone, a place no one will find. Pause while Mark asked for details. I can't explain now, but it's life or death. Do you trust me? Another pause. Thank you. I'll get the key. Jake hung up. And then he did something he knew would cross a definitive line. He turned off the work phone. The phone the department could track, because if the captain or anyone connected to Harrow wanted to know where he was, they could use that phone. And Jake couldn't risk it. Claire was ready. Backpack on her shoulders. Pale but determined face. Jake, you don't have to do this. You've already done too much. You can give me directions and I'll go alone. You don't have to. I need to, Jake interrupted. You don't understand. You're not just in danger from Harrow. You're in danger because the system failed. And if I let you go alone now, if something happens, I won't be able to live with that. He looked directly into her eyes. You trusted me when you made the report. You trusted that the system would protect you. And the system failed you. But I won't fail. Do you understand? I won't abandon you. And there was so much weight in those words, so much commitment, that Claire only nodded, her throat too tight to speak. They left the hotel. Jake checked around. No suspicious cars. No obvious surveillance. But that didn't mean they weren't being watched. It just meant that the watchers were good. The 2-hour drive to the cabin was tense. Jake drove an indirect route, constantly checking mirrors, making sure they weren't being followed. And during that time, Claire finally asked the question she'd been avoiding. How much is this going to cost you? Jake kept his eyes on the road. What? Your career, your badge. You're disobeying direct orders. You're hiding a witness without approval. You're sacrificing everything for me. Why? And Jake could have given a simple answer. He could have said it was just his job, that it was an oath he took. But after everything, after the bomb and threats and the system failing so completely, she deserved the truth. Because 20 years ago, when I joined the police academy, I took an oath. I swore to protect and serve. And over the years, I've seen how the system can corrupt that oath. I've seen how politics and power can turn protection into complicity. I've seen good police officers turn their backs on injustice because it was easier, safer, more convenient. He paused. My father was a police officer, and he was corrupt. He accepted bribes. He looked the other way. And when he died, when I had to clean out his office, I found everything. Hidden money, payment records, and I realized that his badge meant nothing. It was just metal. Power without purpose. The transformation in Jake's voice was palpable. So I swore I'd be different. That my badge would mean something. That when someone needed protection, I'd give it, no matter the cost. He glanced briefly at Claire. You're someone who needs protection. And if I turn my back now, if I choose career over doing the right thing, then I'm exactly like my father. And I can't be that. I can't. And Claire understood. She understood it wasn't about her specifically. It was about who Jake was. About principles he couldn't compromise without losing himself. But it was also about her, because he cared. He genuinely cared about what would happen to her. They arrived at the cabin as the sun was rising. A small structure in the middle of the forest. Isolated. No neighbors for miles. Jake had retrieved the key from a hiding place Mark had indicated. And when they entered, when Claire saw the space, rustic, but clean, with a fireplace and a small kitchen and 2 beds, she finally felt something resembling safety. Not complete safety, but a feeling that, at least for now, no one knew where she was. You stay here, Jake said. I'll be back. I need to deal with the bomb, with the investigation. I need to make it seem like you simply disappeared. Are you coming back? It wasn't a question. It was a confirmation. I am. Tonight, I'll bring supplies. I'll bring everything you need. What if your boss asks where you were? Where I am? I'll lie, Jake said simply. For the first time in 20 years of my career, I'll lie directly to my superior. Because a lie that protects innocent life is more honest than a truth that allows murder. And that statement showed Claire exactly how far Jake was willing to go. How completely he had chosen her side. She approached him, didn't touch, just stood close. Jake, I don't know how to thank you. I don't. You don't need to thank me, he said. Just stay alive. That's all I need. But the impact of the decisions Jake was making, of the lines he was crossing, began to manifest itself when he returned to the city. He went straight to the bomb scene. The forensic team was there. The remains of Claire's car twisted, burned, unrecognizable. If she had been inside, he didn't want to think about it. Captain Morrison was there, and when he saw Jake, his expression hardened. Where were you? I tried calling you multiple times. Phone dead. Jake lied easily. What do we know? Homemade explosive. Placed under the car. Remote detonation. Whoever did this was watching. Waiting for her to get in. But she didn't go in, Jake said. Why? Lucky. She'd forgotten her wallet inside the store. She went back to get it. And while she was inside, the car exploded. Lucky? Or maybe something more. Maybe whoever detonated it panicked, or got the timing wrong. But the result was the same. Claire was alive, and they knew they had failed, which meant they would try again. Morrison pulled Jake aside. Where's Claire Bennett? I don't know. Don't lie to me, Jake. You were with her. You hid her somewhere. She was terrified. She disappeared. I don't know where she is. Morrison studied his face, and Jake maintained a neutral expression. Years of interrogations had taught him how to control micro-expressions. Jake, I'm going to give you advice. As a friend, not as a superior. Leave it. Turn it over to the feds. Because, if you continue, if Harrow finds out you're protecting his witness, he won't just go after Claire. He'll go after you too. Let him come, Jake said, and Morrison sighed. You're a good cop, Jake. One of the best I have. But you're throwing your career away for someone you barely know. I know her well enough. I know she had courage that most don't have, and she's being punished for it. And if the system won't protect her, then I will. Even if it costs me my badge. Jake didn't hesitate. Even so. And Morrison shook his head. Then, you're a fool. A noble fool. But a fool nonetheless. He paused. I have to suspend you, Jake. Effective immediately. You disobeyed direct orders. You're operating outside of protocol. Badge and gun. Now, the moment had arrived. Jake knew it would. And yet, when he had to remove his badge, the badge he'd carried for 20 years, that meant everything. He felt a weight, not regret, but a recognition of sacrifice. He placed the badge and gun in Morrison's hand. This doesn't change anything, he said. I'll still protect her. Without the badge, you're just a citizen. And if Harrow prosecutes you, if he catches you doing something illegal, then I'll deal with the consequences. But at least I'll sleep at night, knowing I did the right thing. Jake left that scene no longer as sheriff, just as a man with a conscience. And when he drove back to the cabin that night, when he opened the door and saw Claire waiting, obvious relief on her face at seeing him return, he knew he had made the right choice. Badge was metal. Career was a title. But protecting Claire, that was who he was, and no one could take that away from him. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the days following Jake's suspension weren't about running or hiding indefinitely. They were about building something, a solid case, mutual trust, and a connection neither of them had planned, but which inevitably grew amidst the danger. Jake could no longer keep Claire in the cabin permanently. It was too remote, too isolated. If something happened, help would be too far away. So he developed a strategy, constant movement, different hotels, different cities, never the same place for more than 2 nights. Never a predictable pattern. He used money he had saved over the years. He booked rooms under false names. He always paid in cash. And he stayed with Claire. He didn't just drop her off at a hotel and leave. He stayed. He slept in a chair when there was only a bed. He slept in the car when she insisted he needed proper rest. But he was always there, always vigilant, always between her and any danger that might come. And in the process, in all those hours driving down back roads, in anonymous hotel rooms, watching the news, trying to see if there was any mention of Claire or Harrow, sharing fast food meals because it was quick and easy, they talked. The transformation from strangers to allies, to something deeper, happened gradually. It began with conversations about the case. Jake explaining what he had discovered about the federal investigation, about Harrow. Connections, about why the system was failing so completely. Claire asking questions, trying to understand how a man could have so much power that he was literally untouchable. But the conversations deepened. One night, in a hotel in a small town 3 hours away, Claire was sitting on the edge of the bed looking out the window. Jake was reviewing notes, tracing connections, trying to find an angle they could use. I ran away before, Claire said suddenly. Jake looked at her. What? From a violent man, 3 years ago. Boyfriend named David. She paused, choosing her words carefully. He was controlling, violent. And when I finally managed to get away, I had to disappear completely. Change my name, change cities, cut off all contact with anyone I knew, because he had threatened to find me. She turned to look at Jake, and it worked. I built a new life. Safe, small, but safe. And then Harrow happened, and I'm running away again, and I hate it. I hate that I always seem to end up in this position." The impact of that revelation hit Jake harder than he expected, because it explained so much. It explained why Claire had been so cautious, so isolated. It explained why witnessing violence had touched something so deep within her that she couldn't ignore it, even knowing the risk. She had been in Marcus's position. She had been a victim with no one to intervene. So when she saw it happening to someone else, she couldn't turn her back, even if it meant putting her own safety at risk. "You're not running away," Jake said. "You're surviving. There's a difference." "What?" "Running away is giving up. Surviving is fighting intelligently." Claire gave a sad half-smile. "It doesn't look like a fight. It looks like I'm hiding while you do the hard work." "You're alive," Jake pointed out, "against a man who clearly wants you dead. That's a victory. A small one, but a victory." And there was truth in that. Claire had survived against impossible odds. She had had the courage to speak out. She had had the strength to keep going when it would have been easier to give up. Jake saw that. He saw resilience she didn't even realize she possessed. And he admired it. Not with pity, but with genuine respect. A few days later, they were driving at night. Jake preferred driving at night because there was less traffic, making it easier to detect if they were being followed. The radio played softly. Claire was half asleep in the passenger seat when Jake began to speak, not necessarily to her, more to himself, but she heard him. "My father was a corrupt police officer," he said. "I found out when I was 17. I found money hidden in his office. A lot of money. And when I confronted him, he didn't deny it. He just said it was how the system worked. That everyone did it. That I would understand when I was older." Jake gripped the steering wheel. "But I never understood. I never accepted it. And when he died, heart attack at 52, I had to clean up the mess. I had to see the full extent of his corruption. How many bribes? How many times he turned his back on crime because he was paid? How many people were hurt because he chose money over duty?" He glanced briefly at Claire. "I became a police officer to be different, to prove that a badge could mean something. And for 20 years, I tried. I really tried. But the system makes it so hard. It rewards obedience. It punishes integrity. And I always wondered, when the crucial moment came, when I had to choose between following orders and doing the right thing, what would I choose? And now, you know," Claire said gently. "Yes, now I know." There was no regret in his voice. There was only acceptance. He had made a choice. He had lost a badge. He had lost a career. But he had maintained his integrity. And for Jake, that was worth more. The emotional journey between them deepened in those weeks. It wasn't romance in the traditional sense. There were no dramatic kisses or confessions of love. It was more subtle, deeper. It was recognition that they had both chosen a difficult path, that they had both paid a price for being aware, and that they both understood each other in a way that few people would. There were small moments that revealed a growing connection, like when Claire woke from a nightmare she had many, about David, about Harrow, about the bomb, and Jake was immediately there, not touching, because he knew she needed space, but present. "You're safe. I'm here." And Claire gradually began to believe those words. She began to trust him in a way she hadn't trusted anyone since David. Or like when Jake was exhausted sleeping 3-4 hours a night, always on alert, and Claire insisted he get proper rest. "I can keep watch for a few hours. You need to sleep." And Jake reluctantly let her. He let her watch over him while he dozed. Mutual trust being built. They began sharing small details of their lives. Claire talked about books she loved, about her dream of maybe one day having a small garden, about how she always wanted to learn piano but never had the opportunity. Jake talked about the daughter he almost had, a pregnancy that ended in miscarriage years ago, a relationship that didn't survive the loss, vulnerabilities being shared, not to manipulate or impress, but because amidst constant danger, amidst uncertainty about the future, there was comfort in being known. truly known. One afternoon, they were in a small diner in a town. Neither of them knew, eating sandwiches in silence. And Claire suddenly said, "Thank you." Jake looked at her. For what? For seeing me. Not just as a witness, not just as a case, but as a person. She paused. David never saw me. I was an object, property. And after I ran away, I did everything to be invisible, because being seen seemed dangerous. But you see me. And I'm not afraid of that. And I don't know the last time I was able to say that about someone. And Jake, looking at her, at the woman who had been through so much and still had the strength to go on, felt something shift inside him. It wasn't just protector and protected. It wasn't just allies fighting a powerful enemy. It was more. It was genuine connection. It was caring, not because it was his job or because it was right, but because she, specifically she, had become important. "I see you," he said. "And what I see is one of the bravest people I know. You had every reason to stay silent, to protect yourself, but you chose to speak. And that's extraordinary." Claire felt tears burning. "I don't feel brave. I feel constantly terrified." "Courage isn't the absence of fear," Jake said. "It's doing the right thing despite the fear. And you did that. You keep doing it." He reached across the table, not to take her hand, just offering. And Claire, after a moment, placed her hand in his. Simple contact, but it meant everything. It meant trust. It meant connection. It meant that neither of them was alone. In this, and for now, amidst the chaos and danger, that was enough. Comment below. When you build intimacy amidst constant danger, when someone sees you completely and still chooses to stay, does that change who you are? Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the discovery that changed everything came not from an official investigation, but from a network Jake had built over 20 years, favors owed, trusted contacts, people who knew people. Jake spent weeks making discreet calls, following cold leads, knocking on doors that most would have given up on after the first attempt. And finally, through a friend of a friend who worked at a veterans hospital 4 states away, he found a trail. Marcus Webb was alive. In hiding, terrified, but alive. Jake made the trip alone. He couldn't risk taking Claire if it was a trap. If someone was watching, he wasn't going to expose her. He drove for 12 hours. He arrived in a small town where Marcus was working under a false name at a building materials depot. And when Jake found him, when he saw the thin man with frightened eyes constantly checking around, he saw Claire's reflection. Another person destroyed by Harrow. Another victim the system had failed. Marcus Webb? Jake asked calmly, not wanting to scare him. Marcus froze, and then turned to run. "Wait," Jake said. "I'm not a threat. Was Sheriff. I'm investigating Daniel Harrow, and I need your help." Marcus stopped. He turned slowly. He said, "Was I lost my badge for not letting this go? But I won't stop until Harrow faces the consequences." The transformation on Marcus's face was gradual. Caution giving way to something resembling desperate hope. Is someone finally doing something? "I'm trying, but I need your testimony. I need you to tell me what happened." And Marcus, in a tiny apartment that smelled of fear and loneliness, told everything. He told about discovering tax irregularities at Harrow Industries, about being contacted by the feds, about agreeing to cooperate because he thought it was right, and then about the night in the warehouse. "Harrow called me in, said he wanted to discuss a promotion. I should have known. I should have." Marcus's voice broke. "He beat me, with his bare hands, said I'd betrayed him, that I'd talked to the wrong people, that he was going to teach me a lesson." Marcus pulled up his shirt, revealing still visible scars, broke 3 ribs, gave me a concussion, and said that if I told anyone, if I didn't disappear, next time he'd kill me, and kill my family. Tears began to fall. So I ran away, changed my name, abandoned everything, because I was afraid. I still am. Jake recorded everything, with Marcus's permission. And then he said something Marcus needed to hear. "You're not alone. There's another witness, a woman who saw the beating. She reported it, and she's paying the price too. But together, you have a solid case. A case that Harrow can't buy out." Marcus looked at Jake with a mixture of fear and determination. "What do you need from me?" "I need you to testify, officially, to the FBI. I need you to be brave one more time." And Marcus, after a long moment, nodded. "Okay, I'll do it. Because I can't live like this forever, looking over my shoulder, afraid of every shadow." The impact of having Marcus willing to testify completely changed the game. Jake now had not just Claire, but a victim. He had not just a witness to the beating, but a victim, who could confirm every detail. And most importantly, he had a direct connection to the federal fraud investigation. Because Marcus had documents, he had copied records before fleeing life insurance. He called them proof of tax manipulation, of fraudulent contracts, of schemes that went far beyond a single beating. Jake returned to Claire with the news, and when she told him she had found Marcus, that he was willing to testify, she cried, not from sadness, from absolute relief. Because finally, it wasn't just her word against the world. Jake made a decision. He wasn't going to local authorities. He wasn't going to the local captain or prosecutor, who were clearly either intimidated or bought off. He was going straight to the FBI, a federal agency that had resources, authority, and was theoretically above Harrow's local influence. He scheduled a meeting. He took Claire and Marcus, and he presented everything: Claire's testimony, medical evidence, Marcus's testimony, tax documents. Marcus had kept in for the first time. Someone with real power listened. Really listened. A federal agent named Sarah Chen meticulously reviewed everything. And then she said words that changed everything. "We have enough to open a formal investigation. And with these documents, we have much more than a beating. We have fraud on a federal scale." The revelation that the case went far beyond what anyone expected came quickly. The FBI had been investigating Harrow for months, but hadn't obtained solid evidence. Now, with Marcus's documents, they had. Within a week, warrants were executed, Harrow's offices were raided, computers confiscated, records seized, and Daniel Harrow was arrested, not for beating, that would come later, but for federal tax fraud, money laundering, and multiple other financial charges. A scheme that had been operating for years. A scheme that had made Harrow rich through completely illegal means. Claire watched the news at the hotel. She saw Harrow being led away in handcuffs, and she felt something she hadn't expected. Not triumph, not joy, just exhaustion. Deep exhaustion from a struggle that was finally ending. Agent Chen contacted Claire directly. "You are officially under federal witness protection. Harrow is in custody. Bail has been denied. You are safe. Safe." A word Claire hadn't felt in months. But even as she felt relief, she also felt loss. Because being safe meant Jake no longer needed to protect her. He no longer needed to stay. And she had grown accustomed to his presence. More than accustomed, it had become essential. But Jake had also lost something. His badge had officially been removed. Not just suspension. Formal dismissal for insubordination, for operating outside protocol, for defying direct orders. 20 years of career. Plans to eventually run for county sheriff. Reputation, it was all gone. Captain Morrison had been clear in his dismissal letter. Your actions, while possibly violated protocol and compromised the integrity of the department. There was no mention that Jake had been right. There was no acknowledgement that he had done what the system should have done. Just punishment. Jake received news in the apartment he was renting. His savings were dwindling. He read the letter once, then he carefully folded it and set it aside. And he realized something. He wasn't devastated. He should be. He should feel the loss of the job that had defined his life for 2 decades. But all he felt was peace. because he had done the right thing. He had protected Claire when no one else did. He had exposed Harrow when the system was willing to look the other way, and that was worth more than a badge. It was worth more than a career. It was worth more than everything. He went to see Claire that night. She was in a new apartment the FBI had provided, temporary, secure, monitored. When she opened the door and saw Jake, she knew. She saw it in his face. "You've been officially fired." It wasn't a question. "Yes, because of me." "For doing the right thing," Jake corrected. "There's a difference." Claire stepped back, letting him in. And when the door closed, when they were alone, she said something she'd been holding back. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything you've lost." Don't be," Jake interrupted. "I chose it, every time, and I'd choose it again." Their journey had reached a turning point. Harrow was imprisoned. Claire was safe, immediate. Danger had receded. But both were facing new beginnings. Claire without a job, without a permanent home, without a community. Jake without a career, without a clear purpose, without direction. And there was an unspoken question hanging between them. What comes next? Now that the crisis is over, now that there is no longer an urgent need for protector and protected, what are they to each other? Claire looked at Jake, at the man who had sacrificed everything, who had stayed when everyone else left, who had become not only a protector but a friend, a confidant, the most important person in her life. "What are you going to do now?" she asked. Jake shrugged. "I don't know. Find work. Rebuild. Figure out who I am without a badge. And us." The question slipped out before Claire could censor it. And Jake looked at her. Really looked. And he saw not just the witness he had protected. He saw a woman he deeply admired, who had shown extraordinary courage, who had become important in ways that went beyond duty or responsibility. "What do you want us to be?" he asked. And Claire didn't have an easy answer, because she wanted to say she wanted him to stay, that she didn't know how to rebuild without him, that the connection they had built amidst the chaos was real and valuable and terrifying. But she was also afraid that their feelings were just the result of shared trauma, afraid of complicating things when they both needed clarity. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the question Claire asked, "What do you want us to be?" hung unanswered between them that night, and in the weeks that followed, as the federal case against Harrow unfolded. As lawyers negotiated and prosecutors built charges, Claire and Jake existed in a strange limbo. They saw each other regularly. Jake checked on her. He brought her coffee. They sat and talked for hours. But there was a new tension, an awareness of something unspoken, of feelings neither of them was ready to name. Claire received news from the FBI 3 weeks after Harrow's arrest. Agent Chen came to the apartment personally. "Claire, we need to talk about next steps. The trial will likely take months. And honestly, even with Harrow in custody, there are security concerns. He has associates, people loyal to him, people who might not like you testifying." The revelation wasn't a surprise, but it still stung. "So what are you recommending?" "Witness protection program. New identity. New city. A completely fresh start. It would be temporary until the trial is complete and any threats are neutralized. But it would be safer." The transformation in Claire's face was immediate, because she had run away before. She had changed her name, her city, her life, and it had worked. She had stayed safe. But she had also lived in solitude, in isolation chosen because trusting was dangerous. And the idea of doing it again, of disappearing again, was both familiar and devastating. Because this time, she had something she didn't have before. She had Jake, and leaving meant leaving him. How much time do I have to decide? A few days. But Claire, seriously consider it. It's the safest option. After Chen left, Claire sat alone in the empty apartment, and she realized she didn't want to go. She didn't want to start over alone again. But she also didn't know if she could ask Jake to go with her. He had already sacrificed so much. She couldn't ask for more. She started packing anyway. Not much, just the essentials. Because even if she stayed, she couldn't stay in that apartment forever. The FBI had made it clear it was temporary, and she needed a plan. She needed direction. She was in the middle of folding clothes when she heard a knock on the door. She checked the peephole. Jake. She opened it, and for the first time in weeks, he wasn't wearing a badge. Because he didn't have one anymore. He was wearing jeans and a civilian jacket. He looked different, less formal, more approachable. "Hi," she said. "Hi, can I come in?" Claire stepped aside, and Jake came in, saw boxes. "You're leaving." It wasn't a question, it was a statement of fact. "I have to go." The FBI recommended a witness protection program. New identity. New city. It's safer. "And where are you going?" Claire hesitated. "I don't know yet, they'll decide. Anywhere that's far from Harrow and this town, far from memories, far from everything." She didn't say far from you, but they both heard it. Jake was silent for a moment, and then he took a step toward her. Not too close, but close enough for her to feel his presence. "What if you didn't have to go alone?" Claire looked at him, really looked, and she saw not the sheriff who had protected her, not an officer doing his duty. She saw a man who had lost his career, his badge, everything that had defined him for 20 years, and who was there offering. "What exactly? What are you saying, Jake?" "I'm saying that he paused, choosing his words carefully. "Harrow took my badge. He took away the career I built. But he didn't take away what I do. He didn't take away who I am. I protect people. That's who I've always been. Badge or no badge." He looked directly into her eyes. "And you still need protection. Not from the FBI, not from some impersonal program that will put you in a random city, give you a new name, and expect you to survive on your own. You need someone who cares personally. Someone who knows your story. Someone who will stay." The impact of those words hit Claire like a wave. "You're offering to come with me, to leave everything here, and what? Be my permanent bodyguard." "Not a bodyguard," Jake said. "A partner. Someone who rebuilds with you, who doesn't leave you to face this alone." Claire felt tears burning. "Jake, you've already lost so much. I can't ask you to lose more. I can't ask you to leave your whole life here. You're not asking, I'm offering. And honestly, Claire, there's nothing here for me anymore. Career gone, reputation tarnished, and people I thought were friends turned their backs on me when I made the difficult choice." He took another step. Now he was close enough to touch, but he didn't. He just stood there, a solid presence. "But you didn't turn your back on me. You had courage when it was easier to stay silent. You kept your story when it was easier to change it. You trusted me when you had every reason not to trust anyone. And through it all, you became important. Not as a duty, not as a responsibility, as a person, as someone He stopped. Because the next words were big, scary, true, as someone I don't want to lose. The emotional journey that had brought them to that moment was neither quick nor easy. It was built on shared trauma, yes, but also on mutual respect, on vulnerability, on conscious choices to trust, even when trusting was terrifying. Claire had learned that Jake was a man of his word, that when he said he would protect, he protected, even at the cost of everything. And Jake had learned that Claire was stronger than she realized, that courage didn't always seem heroic. Sometimes it just seemed like continuing when it would have been easier to give up. "You don't really know me," Claire said, but her voice trembled. "You only know the version of me that was in constant danger. You know the terrified person. You don't know who I am when there's no crisis. Then let me get to know you," Jake said simply. "Let me find out who you are when you can breathe, when you can sleep without fear, when you can just be Claire, not a witness or a victim or someone on the run." He paused. "And let me find out who I am without a badge. Because, honestly, I don't know. I spent 20 years being Sheriff Jake Mercer, and now I'm just Jake. And it's scary. But it's less scary if I don't have to figure it out myself. Claire felt something break inside. Not in a bad way, but the defense she had held up, the protection she had used for so long, finally gave way. I'm scared, she admitted. I'm scared that this is just trauma connecting us. I'm scared that when life goes back to normal, when there's no more danger, we'll realize there's nothing real there. I'm scared of depending on you and then losing you. I'm scared too, Jake admitted. Scared of not being enough without a badge. Scared that you'll only see me as a protector, and when you no longer need protection, you won't want me. Scared of ruining the only good thing that came out of all this. But fear is no reason not to try, he continued. Fear is a reason to be careful, to be honest, to build something real instead of just reacting to circumstance. He finally reached out. So let's try. Let's go where the FBI wants to send you. Or let's not. We choose our own place. We start again, together, without pressure, without expectations beyond honesty. And we see what is real and what was just circumstance. But we do it together. Claire looked at the outstretched hand, and she realized it wasn't about dramatic romance or a declaration of eternal love. It was about choice. The choice not to be alone, the choice to trust, the choice to build something with someone who had proven repeatedly that they would stay even when staying was difficult. She took his hand, fingers intertwined. Okay, she said. Let's try. And Jake, holding her hand, felt something he hadn't felt since losing his badge. He felt purpose. Not the purpose of a position or title, but the purpose of choice. Of deciding that this person, this brave, broken, and strong woman, was worth rebuilding an entire life around. Worth a fresh start. Worth the risk. So where are we going? He asked. Claire gave a half smile, her first real smile in weeks. I don't know, but maybe. Maybe somewhere neither of us has been. Somewhere without bad memories. Somewhere where we can just be Jake and Claire. Not ex-sheriff and witness. Just us. That sounds perfect, Jake said. And it was. Not perfect without problems. Not perfect without fear or uncertainty. But perfect as a choice. As a starting point. As a promise that no matter what came, they would face it together. The proposal hung between them, weighed down by possibility. The possibility of real love built on a solid foundation. The possibility of a new beginning that wasn't an escape, but progress. The possibility that sometimes, amidst the worst of humanity, you find the best. And sometimes, when you lose everything, you discover what truly matters. And for Jake and Claire, standing in that empty apartment holding hands, what mattered was right there, in each other, not as savior and saved, but as partners, as equals, as two people choosing to build something new together. And this is where their journey ends for now. Not because the story is over. Stories like this never truly end neatly wrapped up. They continue, they evolve. Claire will still have to testify. He will still have to face Harrow in court and relive trauma. Jake will still have to discover who the badgeless person is who defined his life for 2 decades. Both will have difficult days, days where they question their choices, days where fear and doubt seem greater than hope. But what's the difference now? They don't face it alone. Claire is no longer an isolated woman being hunted for revealing the truth. She's someone with a partner, someone who chooses to stay even when things get complicated. And Jake is no longer a man defined by a badge he lost. He's a man defined by the choices he made. A choice of integrity over career. A choice to protect over obey. A choice of being a person over being a system. And what about Harrow? He's facing decades in prison. An empire built on corruption is crumbling. People he intimidated are finally talking. And all because one woman had the courage not to remain silent. And one man had the courage to believe when no one else did. Sometimes justice is slow. Sometimes the system fails. But sometimes, Just sometimes, the right people make the right choices, and the truth finally wins. If this kind of story resonates with you, if you want to keep following stories about people confronting impossible power, about real protection when the system fails, about connections built amidst chaos, subscribing here is the way to continue walking with me. Because every week I bring you stories like this. Stories about courage, when courage costs everything. About doing the right thing when it would be easier to look the other way. About ordinary people choosing the extraordinary. Comment below. I'm with you until the end. I read every comment, every word. And I want to know if Claire and Jake resonated with you the same way they resonated with me. If you felt a sense of injustice. If you rooted for them. If you believe that sometimes losing a badge but keeping your soul is worth more than any career. And if this touched you in any way, if at any point you felt anger towards the system or relief when Harrow was arrested or hope when Jake offered to start over with Claire, leave a like so I know. Because these stories are about connection. And the like tells me that connection happened. That you felt what I wanted you to feel. There's a video over here that continues in the same vein. Another story about someone denouncing a dangerous truth, about a protector who chooses a person based on orders, about justice being achieved brick by brick, even when it seems impossible. Click and follow me there. Because the journey doesn't end. It just changes characters, setting, but always with the same truth at its core. Everyone deserves to have someone who believes in them. Everyone deserves to fight. And sometimes, when you lose everything but find the right person, you discover that you had to lose everything to find what really matters. See you soon.